You know, the more notes on a chord, the more responsibility you have to lead them all in the right direction.
A young man trying to impress beyond his abilities. Too much spice. Too many notes.
Hey, we just hit 1,000 subscribers on the channel. So to celebrate, I took an octave and divided it into 1,000 different notes. And played a chord using every single one of those notes. But that sounded, not good. But I wonder, is it even possible to create a chord that uses 1,000 different notes that actually sounds good? All right, so ground rules. 1, the notes that we choose to be a part of this chord need to be within the range of human hearing, because it would just be way too easy to play a consonant major triad somewhere in the middle of the piano and then dump 997 other notes either so high or so low that we literally can't perceive them. 2, repeated notes don't count. So for example, if I establish this C as being part of our chord, I then can't use the C an octave up and have it count as a new note. I'm looking for technically different pitch classes. And you might be wondering, are there even 1,000 discretely different notes within the range of human hearing available to us? And the answer is no. At least not within the boundary of our 12-tone system. So we're gonna have to make up some notes. Time to get microtonal. Typically, we divide an octave into 12 equally spaced notes. Clearly, that's not gonna be enough. So I propose dividing that same octave into 1,000 different notes. This division is gonna cost us. How much, you ask? About 1 cent. In tuning theory, a cent is a unit of interval measurement. In fact, it's the smallest unit of measurement that we have. How small is 1 cent? It's about this small. And if you can't tell the difference between these two notes, don't worry at all. It's not practical. You're in the majority. Most musicians can't hear it. And even I, who messes with this stuff all day, every day, have trouble discerning the difference of 1 cent. Unless you go the path of the obscure microtonalist, being able to hear the difference of 1 cent is just not a relevant skill to have. You will never, in your entire musical career, be expected to hear that well. The difference can be hard to discern. It takes a difference of 100 cents between two given pitches to equal 1 semitone or a minor second. This is the smallest interval that we have available to us on a standard piano. 200 cents is a whole tone or a major second, 300 is a minor third, 400 is a major third, and so on and so forth until we get the octave at 1,200 cents. This makes 1 cent 1/1200th of an octave. Consequently, this makes creating a 1,200 note chord somewhat simple. The octave can divide, for lack of a better word, easily into 1,200 individual notes. Classical Nerd has a video on this very subject. If you're interested in a more in-depth explainer, I'll put the link in the description. But just to give you a taste of what a 1,200 note chord sounds like, here you go. Now, there are 1,000 of you subscribed, not 1,200, so after some rudimentary math, we get this. The intervals in this 1,000 note chord are all separated each by 1.2 cents. And lo and behold, it still sounds not good. I wonder if some traditional theory can help us out here. Most of us, after all, myself included, are used to constructing chords out of 12 notes, not 1,000. And even within those 12 notes, we usually only use 3 or 4 or maybe 5 in any given chord. So maybe we can spread out this chord over multiple octaves in some sort of clever voicing to get it sounding, you know, good. That being said, there have been methods in the past of how to voice fully chromatic 12-note chords that we might be able to borrow from. Maybe we can even find a method that'll help us get this chord sounding good. We don't even have to look that far back. In a 2017 interview, resident music geek and man who plays literal humans as instruments, Jacob Collier, proposed this voicing for an all-note chord.
A, F sharp, C, E flat, F. C sharp A, and then an octave higher, G, B flat, A flat, like that. And it's just like.
Side note, I stumbled on this amazing impression of Jacob singing Happy Birthday the other day while I was doom scrolling on TikTok, and I just feel like the world needs to see this.
Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you.
Shout out to Anna Hale for like the most accurate impression of any musician ever. Anyway, back to Jacob's everything chord. In his book, Serial Composition, composer Reginald Smith Brindle argues that total chromatic chords don't have to be dissonant. He writes, if dissonances are widely dispersed and a strongly tonal note grouping is placed in the lower region of the chord, the result is excellent and not unpleasant. Jacob exemplifies this advice in constructing his chord by filling out the bottom with a nice open voice D major chord, which provides a strong consonant foundation on which to stack all other dissonances. Now, calling it excellent might be a little bit of a stretch. Jacob is arranging this for voice, which has an inherent range that forces the chord to endure a few close clusters in the mid-range of the treble staff. This creates a dissonance I think we can avoid. Enter 20th century Austrian composer Fritz Heinrich Klein, a student of both Arnold Schoenberg and Albenberg, and the inventor of the mother of all chords. Literally. But more on that in a second. In the early 20s, Fritz Heinrich Klein proposed this kind of musical math puzzle, the key of which would provide the foundation for his seminal work, Die Maschine. The goal was to arrange an all 12-note chord that used all intervals exactly once. Klein's original solution was to construct something he called the Pyramid Chord, which contains all possible intervals stacked from largest to smallest. This is pretty neat. It contains all the intervals, but it doesn't contain all the notes. This frustrated Klein and pushed him to derive from his pyramid chord the aforementioned mother of all chords. Literally, he called it the Mother Chord, so named because it supposedly contains all other chords within it. Klein would go on to argue that it is the chord that unites all other chords. P.S. It doesn't really. I mean, it kind of does. It technically does, but it's slightly disingenuous. It contains all chords within it in the sense that it uses all 12 notes, so it must contain all chords with it, but that's not a unique feature. You can literally say that about any arrangement of any 12-note cluster ever, which by Klein's own rudimentary math is somewhere near 500 million different possible chords. Still, the mother chord is unique in one other way. Klein noticed that if you highlighted all the repeated notes that appear naturally within the formulation of the pyramid chord and dropped them all by a half step, you get all 12 notes while still retaining all possible intervals. Great, awesome, musical math puzzle solved. But I kind of feel like we're slipping into some weird academic echo chamber and we haven't heard actual music in like 2 minutes, so what does this thing actually sound like? Okay, well, I mean, that's better. The dissonances are more spread out, especially within the lower notes of the chord. All the notes are represented, and as a bonus, all the intervals are there. Come to think of it, this might be more of a challenge in terms of instrument choice and timbre, rather than solely in voicing. That being said, I don't think we can get any better with just voicing alone, so let's work with it. You might be wondering, how do we apply the principles or template of the mother chord onto our 1,000-note chord? I mean, there are 1,000 notes, so is there really any way to avoid really close dissonances? And again, the answer is no, but I'd argue that it actually doesn't matter. Remember how small a cent was? The difference, especially when placed in the context of actual music, is nearly imperceptible to almost everyone. If I play two tones together, say my fundamental and the next chromatic note 1.2 cents up, the chances are your brain won't perceive them as two separate notes, but rather as one affected note. It could sound like one note that's lost a little bit of clarity, or perhaps has a slight chorus effect on it. If we stack on a couple more notes from our giant 1,000-note chromatic scale, it might start to sound a little thicker. Add a couple more notes, and we start to approach our quarter tone, and it starts to sound a little bit muddy. And now, 80 some odd notes later, we're starting to encroach on some deep dissonance as we get closer and closer to the semitone. At some point, we cross a perceptual line, and the muddy mess of one note goes through a sort of musical mitosis and becomes the dissonance of two distinct notes. Depending on how adept your ear is, this line may be somewhere near the semitone. It might be at the quarter tone. It might be somewhere in between or back near the beginning. The line that creates that spicy dissonance is one we want to avoid. We don't want too many of these close clustered dissonances, so we'll stack notes until we start to approach that perceptual boundary. But right up to that line, we can group all of these notes together and treat them effectively as one note, albeit a muddy note, but one note all the same. I'm going to call this grouping a pitch band. Once we've stacked all of our notes together, we can take these pitch bands and spread them across the octaves in the style of Klein's Mother Chord. The result is this: a subscriber-powered mad experiment, a proper 1,000-note chord, a single note for each and every one of you guys. That was a little bit overwhelming. I still think we can do a little bit better. So let's calm down, relax, and listen to some white noise. Hey, what is white noise anyway, and what does it have to do with creating a better 1,000-note chord? Oh, you know, it's like that fuzzy, staticky, old radio, TV sound. Some people will put it on to help them go to sleep, I guess. Oh, yeah, no, I know, but like, what's it made out of? Oh, good question. Hey, John, do you know what white noise is made out of? I don't know, old people named Karen complaining that America just isn't the same anymore. Oh, are we talking about the same white noise here? Oh, sorry, you were talking about audio science again, weren't you? Yeah? Anyway, white noise refers to a type of noise that contains all frequencies across the spectrum of audible sound, such that all specific frequencies present at equal amplitude. Basically, the higher amount of different notes or frequencies you tack onto a given moment, the more like white noise that moment will sound. We just observed what happens when too much added frequency turns one note into two. Take that to its extreme, and we can see that too much added frequency can turn a whole chord into white noise. Now, 1,000 notes across the spectrum of audible sound isn't quite enough to turn this chord into white noise, but it's close, and with each added frequency, it gets a little closer. And while white noise serves a purpose, it's definitely not what we're going after here. So let's deconstruct a little bit. If we look at the definition of white noise again, we can see that one of its core properties is that all frequencies present at equal amplitude, or volume. So what I'm thinking is if we take the outer bounds of our pitch band and automate their volume in a gradient towards the center, we can curb some of those unnecessary noise-like qualities that's making our chord sound like white noise. This is what that sounds like. I should probably stop here before I completely lose sight of our goal and reduce the elements of this 1,000-note chord so much that it, in effect, no longer has 1,000 notes. I want to go back to Klein for a minute, because the bulk of this video has been built around his philosophies, and I feel his work needs some recognition. In a letter written to his mentor, Alban Berg, in March of 1922, Klein expressed his deep excitement over his discovery of the Mother Chord. He wrote, "I must tell my beloved master that today I discovered the first chord of 12 different tones and simultaneously of 12 different intervals. It is the most wonderful fruit which the permutation of the Mother Chord can bring forth. And at the same time, it's the end of all possibilities in the area of chord building in 12 semitone music." I think it's very telling that Klein takes special care to note that it's not the end of chord building, but the end of chord building in 12-tone music. This was a man who pushed the edges of the musical world which housed him. He found the boundary of the world he inhabited, but refused to tie himself to the perceived immovability of that boundary. I think Klein was an unseen visionary of his time. His contributions to serialism largely went unrecognized. Even today, the success of his contemporaries and even his mentors, who arguably built off of his work, embittered him. After composing Die Maschine, the whole reason he created this chord in the first place, Klein would go on to write a paper called The Boundary of the Semitonal World, which is an essay where he expounded his thoughtful and innovative ideas about chord building. And yet he would never see the same level of success that his contemporaries would find in life. He would withdraw from the world of classical contemporary music, largely fading into obscurity before passing away in July of 1977. I wonder what Klein might think about our modern musical landscape. He certainly didn't have an interest in the pop music of his time, so he might not have an interest in the pop music of ours. But also a lot less people today are listening exclusively to pop. I'd like to think that if Fritz Heinrich Klein were alive today, through the internet, through the niche-finding nature of YouTube, that he'd be able to find the audience that he never could in his life. I am so thankful for my audience here. 1,000 might not seem like a large number in the grand scheme of things, but it's an important one to me. I'd just like to thank every single one of you guys for supporting me. So in honor of all of you and my man Fritz Heinrich Klein, I'm going to play us out to an extreme 1,000-note reharmonization of Klein's Die Maschine.